As the Cold War continued to heat up, conflicts around the world would test the US policy of containment. In addition, the introduction of the atomic bomb at the end of World War II ushered in the age of nuclear arms development and an arms race between the US and Soviets. These developments raised the likelihood that any direct conflict between the US and Soviets would trigger World War III, which would call for the use of nuclear weapons. In this lesson, we will investigate how early conflicts in the Cold War played out and the effect nuclear technology had on the mindset of the American public. Nuclear weapons proliferate the world today, so who has access to them and when they may choose to use them is an issue that influences U.S. foreign policy. The first test of the U.S. policy of containment came in 1948 in the city of Berlin. After World War II, Germany was divided into four occupation zones: a British, French, and US sector in the western half, and a Soviet sector in the eastern half. Berlin, which sat in the Soviet sector, was also divided into four occupation zones. When the British, French, and US combined their zones in Berlin, the Soviets responded by blockading the city and cutting it off from supplies from the West. Rather than risk a war by running the blockade, and not willing to allow Berlin to fall to communism, the Western Allies ran an airlift to keep the city supplied. The airlift lasted 10 months until the Soviets ended the blockade. Containment had passed its first test. The next test came in 1950. The Korean Peninsula was divided after World War II into a communist north and a US backed south. In June of 1950, the North Koreans invaded and quickly overran the South. US and NATO troops were able to hold on at Pusan and launch a counterattack at Incheon. By the end of September, they were able to recapture Seoul. Not content to leave things as they were, the US launched an invasion of North Korea. Not wanting a US presence on their border, China sent in troops to support North Korea. The US was forced to retreat to the original border, and for the next 2 years, the war became a stalemate. In 1953, a ceasefire was agreed to, and the division of Korea at the 38th parallel remained. The US had once again showed its willingness to enforce the policy of containment. While this was going on, nuclear technology continued to develop. After the use of the atomic bomb to end World War II, an arms race began. The hydrogen bomb was the next advancement and was more powerful than the atomic bomb. Duck and cover drills were practiced to teach school children what to do in the event of a nuclear attack, and fallout shelters were built to give the public a place to hide. These gave an appearance that the nuclear threat could be managed. The fear of communism also led to paranoia at home. Convinced that communists were working to bring down the country from the inside, Senator Joseph McCarthy held hearings in which people were accused, without evidence, of being communists. Those that admitted to being a communist were punished, and those that denied it were charged with obstruction of justice. This lose lose situation was the basis of Arthur Miller's The Crucible, which used the Salem witch trials as an allegory for McCarthyism. Paranoia justifiably increased in 1957 when the Soviets launched Sputnik, the first man made satellite into orbit. Fearful that the Soviets would win the space race, the US created NASA to develop its own space program. The 1950s were a time of paranoia and expansion of Cold War tensions. Conflicts in Berlin and Korea showed that the US was willing to enforce its policy of containment. Fear of communism led to witch hunts at home, and technology led to the advancement of nuclear weapons and the space race. In the next lesson, we will learn how close these tensions brought us to a direct war with the Soviets during the Cuban Missile Crisis.